Over to you, Pam.
Thanks very much, Fred. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on what I know is going to be a really interesting morning. I'm Pam Alexander, I'm chair of Commonplace, and I'm absolutely delighted that over 200 people registered to join us today. I have to apologise if you hear banging, it's the scaffolding going up outside my window, which means I can't show you my view onto Clapham Common. But let's start with some housekeeping. We'll record the webinar and share it afterwards by email, and it will be available on our website. So if you don't want to be shown, make sure you don't have your cameras on when we get to questions. If you want to ask your question, I think it'll be through me, won't it, Fred?
Using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen.
I was about to say that. Okay. Put any questions into the Q&A during the talk, and we'll save those for the end. If you include a panelist's name, then we can direct the question to them. And if you'd like to share what's going on social media, please use the hashtag #SafeSpaces, safe singular spaces. Our goal today is to explore the issues of safety for women and girls with ideas for engaging them in finding solutions and feeding these into longer term strategies. A recent survey for UN Women UK, who I'm glad to say we have represented here today, found that 80% of women of all ages in the UK said they had experienced sexual harassment in public spaces, with men overwhelmingly the perpetrators. I'm one of those women, I'm sure many on the call are. To capture the phrase, it isn't all men, but it is all women. And in order to make change happen, we need information on the issues and the potential solutions. Now that this is a real conversation happening in a most important number of fora. Today, we want to offer both in the context of women's safety in public places to contribute to the major conversation that started around the murder of Sarah Everard, just walking home, just outside my window. In order to make change happen, we need, sorry, I've said that. It's about the disrespect, the harassment, and both the physical and the sexual abuse and danger that sadly girls and women face every day. It's a multi-layered challenge, including societal attitudes, that certainly does not involve all men as perpetrators, but it certainly does affect their mothers, their sisters, their daughters, their female and women friends. So collecting information and ideas from women and girls about areas where they feel unsafe and what can be done has to be the starting point. I'm pleased that we've just instigated such a conversation at the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park, which I'm involved in, with local groups and using Commonplace with a wider survey. And today we're going to be joined by 5 campaigners and practitioners who will share the techniques that they use to spark these conversations in their communities to make change happen. At Commonplace, we know that digital tools can help us to have these conversations in neighbourhoods and at scale, enabling us to present aggregate data at the local level. So Jen Miller, our VP Revenue, will be sharing a bit more about our Safe Streets programme after our guest speakers, and we'll be inviting you all to get involved and to use our heat map. So let me introduce our 5 guests in the order in which they will speak. First, Claire Barnett, Executive Director of UN Women UK. At McKinsey, Claire authored publications on the macroeconomic effect of accelerating gender equality on UK GDP. And she worked on diversity and inclusion strategy. She holds a master's from Oxford, examining the history of gender identity. So a very broad background in this subject. But Claire joins us today to talk about the Safe Spaces Now project, which she's currently working on, and some of the campaigns that UN Women UK are running. Lauren Brown is a Geography and International Development student at the University of East Anglia, and she's founded, in affiliation with UN Women UK, a student society on campus to campaign against gender inequality. And Lauren will talk about ways of bringing younger women and girls into this crucial conversation. Anna Burley is co-founder of Reclaim These Streets, formed in March this year in response to the murder of Sarah Everard, to speak up on street harassment of women and girls, educate boys and men to take responsibility for the problem of violence against women and girls, and challenge misogyny in the way some of our laws are written and enforced. She's also a Labour councillor in Lambeth. May East is an urban ecologist, I love that phrase, at the UN Institute of Training and Research, spanning the fields of cultural geography, urban ecology and women's studies. She works in 55 countries with community-based organisations and intergovernmental agencies seeking to strengthen climate resilience, food security and women's empowerment. And she's currently investigating how cities of the present and the future would look, informed by women's perspectives and priorities. Keith Stanger is Head of Community Safety at the London Borough of Islington, and he's our last guest speaker. With over 20 years working in the policing and community safety fields, he's led many successful projects and initiatives, and the borough is currently focusing on reducing the fear of crime for borough residents, particularly women, people from the Black community, and young people. So you can see we have a really brilliant panel with us today, and I'm going to hand over immediately to Claire. We'll have all 5 speakers, then Jen, and then questions at the end. Claire.
Thank you so much, Pam, for that wonderful intro, and it's really a privilege to be alongside such exciting speakers today. So you've heard a little bit about what we do at UN Women. We are a young organisation in the UN system, only about 50 years behind some of our sister agencies. So I think a little bit of a testimony to the world waking up to the need for greater action on gender equality. And I'm really pleased today to be able to talk to you a little bit about our Safe Spaces Now project, and hopefully inspire some ideas about what those of you in the audience might like to get involved with. So we have a whistle-stop tour today, so I'm going to spend just 5 to 7 minutes running through the background to the project and where we are now, and I'll be pleased to take any questions afterwards. So this will be a short introduction, but hopefully an interesting one. So I'm going to share my screen to start with that now. And go full screen. Just bear with me 1 second while that comes up. There we go. I'm going to assume that there will be waves if anything looks odd on your screen, but otherwise I assume that you can all see this fine. So we know that we need safer public spaces because of some of the data that you've already heard, but also around the world, UN Women has been running a framework called Safe Cities and Safe Public Spaces for 10 years now. And this problem, you know, the conversation around it may have got greater, but we don't think that any country in the world has yet solved this problem. So we know that over 7 in 10 women in the UK have been sexually harassed, and over 95% didn't report these incidents. This is particularly high among the youngest age groups that were interviewed, and almost 9 in 10 women in some cities around the world reported being unsafe in public spaces. This is also, violence against women is a spectrum of behaviours. So while sexual harassment and public street harassment can sometimes be seen as a milder form of gender-based violence, it's really linked into a spectrum that includes more serious violence and attacks. So we want to highlight that this is a serious problem. It's not something that should be normalised or underplayed. Over the past decade that UN Women has been running this flagship programming initiative, it's really been all about producing data and partnerships, comprehensive legal address of the issue, but also investing on the ground at the grassroots level in the safety and economic viability of public spaces, because actually protecting women and empowering them against gender-based violence is very closely connected to the economic benefit to communities as well. And when we empower communities economically, typically rates of violence also fall. So this is quite a complex picture where it's about the well-being of societies as a whole, as well as a human rights issue for women and a crisis in that sense. And it's been about transforming social norms, so not only the design of spaces, but the behaviour within them. And we did this because we saw that public space is an area that historically has often been treated as a really difficult area to crack. There are questions around who owns public spaces. You know, is this always a pattern of behaviour that will be normalised, and can we ever really create change? And so as the global organisation that works from grassroots to government with all sorts of stakeholders from the private sector to activists, UN Women took on this problem, knowing that change is possible, but only if we work together. So we started with a pilot in 5 cities and now have over 40 cities worldwide and counting signed up formally, including London under the current Mayor of London's leadership. But actually this goes far beyond cities and urban spaces and very much into rural areas and thinking quite broadly about public spaces as well. So we've already covered some of the data, and you'll see on the right there that at some of the protests about Sarah Everard's death, or inspired by that, we saw the data from this survey really being shared as a call to action, and the idea that this can't go on any longer. It's happened long enough. And particularly interesting in the survey was that we found that the reasons that over 95% of women weren't reporting were a lack of knowledge about what can be reported and what is serious enough. Almost half of respondents saying they really didn't believe it would change anything. So a problem with lack of trust in the system, and also concerns about anonymity, whether they would be safe and protected if they did report. So obviously that has to change. The way that we think about this project is a cycle of change. So it's if we can source the data and really shed light on exactly what is happening, which women are being worse affected, because of course women who experience intersecting minoritized characteristics are even more at risk of some of these problems. If we can really shed light to that data, which is what we've spent the past year doing, we can work with stakeholders to solve really specific problems that we know will work and genuinely address the problem, and then scale that solution, sharing that back to the public so that they can see that somebody is addressing their concerns and become more confident to then report. So we see that as a virtuous cycle, and that's the theory of change behind this. So over the past few months, we worked with over 600 workshop participants and over 2,000 survey respondents to generate ideas, starting at the grassroots with a particular focus on marginalised groups of women, to come up with ways that they think actually really work across various spaces. And we whittled down those ideas. So the challenge was, how can we redesign the spaces and the behaviour within them to be safer and more inclusive? And I'm sure you'll hear lots more thoughts from different groups and the other speakers about that today. So we've gone from over 150 high potential ideas, working with a youth board to stretch and stress test those ideas down to a top 12 across 3 spaces. And as we just have a short slot today, you can just see some previews there, but we also use social media a lot to then take those ideas and have our wider community vote on them and add their thoughts and help to build that together. So those spaces were streets and public transport. And as you see here, we always start with insights that we hear over and over again coming up in the workshops, and then move those using design thinking methodology into ideas. The second space is nightlife, leisure venues and festivals. And the third is online spaces, so breaking down that traditional barrier between online and offline. And we know that a transformational impact is already happening. So the feedback that we've had from the workshops is that people really come in feeling unsafe and anxious, but also very frustrated about the pace of change, and are leaving feeling like there is hope. And that's certainly the message that we want to spread. This is about empowering people to sit at the table with the government, the public services, transport providers and more, and have their voice heard to create ideas that really work. So I don't have the time to show you these now, but I'm happy to share this afterwards. We've made a video that imagines what would a safer world actually look like if women weren't constantly doing the safety work to moderate our behaviour, that we hope will inspire people to really get involved in enacting these ideas. And we've worked with a number of professional artists and community representatives to commission a 3D virtual art gallery that we think really brings this design thinking of a different future and a different possibility to life. So you're welcome on our website to stroll around that virtual gallery in your own time and really explore what this other world we think looks like. So finally, if you'd like to get involved, if you do represent an organisation here today, we would love you to join us and Commonplace and the others on this call, and sign up as a Safe Spaces Now movement maker, which is our steering group for the project. There's a lot of exciting people involved in that, and we would love organisations to be represented. But also, if you'd like to help in another way, I'll drop the email address into the chat later during this session. Do send us an email and find out how you can get involved, because there's a place for everybody, from politicians to small charities to schools. So we think that as a final thought, this is an issue that has gone on for all of living memory, but actually one that we really think there is a unique opportunity to create change, as we've all exited public spaces at one time, which hopefully will be a once in a lifetime opportunity. Taking this moment to reconsider how our spaces are put together and how we act within them, to actually return to the public spaces in June and from there beyond in a more conscious space, and really thinking about our behaviour and what we can do differently. So we hope that everybody will take that call to action.
Thank you very much, Claire. That was really inspiring, and I'm sure you're going to get an awful lot of visitors to that website. And a great link then into talking to Lauren about the work that she's done to create exactly one of those sorts of groups. Lauren, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Pam, and thank you, Claire. That was amazing, as always. I've been attending Claire's workshops, so to see the impact that UN Women UK have been doing to societies and universities, I've seen firsthand. So, hello, my name's Lauren, and I'm a soon-to-be graduate of University of East Anglia with a degree of Geography and International Development. I'd just like to say how honoured I am to be on this panel and appreciative that organisations such as Commonplace and stakeholders such as yourselves are having this conversation. During my time at university, I've been volunteering with UN Women UK, and as Pam mentioned, I founded a society on campus during COVID-19. This gained 70 students, of male and female students, to campaign for gender equality. In that time, we worked with organisations such as Bold Voices, Our Streets Now, Girl Up, and Living Proof World. And we also took part in the 65th UN Commission on the Status of Women. We did this to build our knowledge on the gender inequality which is very present globally today. My aim as president of the society was to bring all genders together on campus to tackle the conversation of safe spaces. I worked with the student union at University of East Anglia on a campaign for End Stop the Culture, which highlights not only women's safety but harassment in all sectors, genders, race and religion. We have continued to work with security on campus, technicians, policymakers of the union and most importantly the students. But why do we need to have this conversation? As a community researcher for UN Women UK, and like Claire mentioned, we commissioned a UK-wide survey on sexual harassment, reaching more than 1,000 respondents. And as you will continue here today, and as Claire mentioned, UN Women UK did this because we need to understand and help to increase understanding and visibility of the issue. And in return, how more trusted routes for reporting can be created. As we know, fundamentally, women have the right to feel safe in public spaces. And as harassment of women and girls have been ingrained in our societal culture, it's often hidden in plain sight. As to why the intrusion of harassment and danger is always about power and control. Faced with the COVID-19 pandemic, it is crucial to provide guidance and support for gender equality and women's empowerment. What I found with my work is that independent evaluation of organisations such as my student union allows evaluation of the gender gap for security and safety needs to be embedded in all businesses and programmes, as this will not only benefit society today but also the efficiency of students in the workplace and business overall. So how can organisations work with campaigns, groups, universities to engage with different audiences? First is communication. This panel is the beginning of something amazing. It's a catalyst for trust and strength. It is allowing women such as myself that they are being heard and organisations understand there is a problem. Second thing is networking. In my role as president of the society, I had to network with a range of organisations, calling on local grassroots organisations for partnerships. By doing this, it increases the people in the conversation and also diversifies the sample group. It's one thing for all women to be taking part in this conversation, but this is exactly why we have a great range of panellists today, as we need all viewers of all age ranges, genders, races, religions. By pinpointing each other's strengths and also weaknesses, we can build a solid platform for change. As students, we have little funding and small amount of power physically, other than using our voices. Finally, how can we prove there is a change, that spaces are becoming safer for women and girls? So by implementing workshops and policies, such as safe public spaces that we did with UN Women UK, within your organisations, women are already feeling heard. Policy making and implementation of projects can take a while, and I understand that by working with the student union. But immediate actions such as code words when a woman does not feel safe, in partnership with security, posters in public spaces such as kitchen areas, or even small introduction workshops when starting a job, highlighting the morals and expectancies of your organisations. So to give an example of how I engaged with the population, younger individuals, both genders, is that I independently started up and gave presentations to presidents of sports and societies on campus. This was my way of communicating to young individuals and people in influential positions that there is a problem, which could relate to communicating with your peers and managers on this topic. I made the conversation mutual about the role we all have to play in changing the environment and keeping our campus safe. This involved conversations which can combat the culture of harassment. From that conversation, I built on the ideas given, and I didn't keep this to myself. I produced a document which was then sent to all of the members that took part, as well as all society members of the student union, something that everyone could build on and then show all strengths. So to round off, and to give my overall experience as a young woman, student and activist, the key problems in communities for women and girls is that policy and reporting is not clearly available for women. Going forward and highlighting this problem with Student Union was needed, and they now are evaluating the reporting system and making those adjustments for change. Students at universities and overall women of the public are reporting, but processing and confidence in the system is getting slower. Clarity of change is needed on all platforms. Being heard and seen was our first main problem, but we have now overcome that and come out the storm, as this webinar shows. Not just people in high professional jobs, but grassroots organisations who are dealing with this problem needs to be involved in the conversation. We then can build and connect using each other's strengths, building this platform together, which can highlight, identify and present ways for development, and certainly is the pathway for success. And I appreciate you all for listening today.
That was great. Thank you so much, Lauren. Your point that we need all the voices in this is such an important one. Young people and structurally incorporating those voices in institutions is going to be a really important step going forward. I'm delighted to see that there are quite a number of men participating in the webinar today. I listened to Julie Gillard, sorry, the past Prime Minister of Australia. I'm really having trouble with the noise outside this morning. And it is so important that we have men in the room as well as women talking about this issue. So exciting work going on there, and congratulations for leading that. Now we'll move on to Anna, who has also stimulated a really exciting conversation. Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Pam, and what an act to follow. Clara and Lauren are doing such incredible and inspiring work, so I hope I can at least start to emulate some of the great stuff that they're doing. So my name's Anna, I'm from Reclaim These Streets. We started out as a group of friends in South London who sort of picked up the phone to each other in March and sort of feeling scared and angry about the disappearance of Sarah Everard from the streets in which we live. Her face was on every lamppost, and we had police door knocking in our local area telling women that for their own safety perhaps we ought to stay at home. And I think that was what really provoked us to go from sort of grief to frustration and action, was that we didn't feel that women are the problem here. The problem of violence against women isn't something that women behaving differently should be the answer to. No matter what we wear, where we walk, what time of day or night it is, streets should be safe for everybody, and that has to include women. And it's wrong that the response to women not being safe in our public spaces requires us to behave differently. So we began by looking to organise a vigil. 2 days later, we were in High Court because there were all sorts of issues around doing that with the police. But we've clearly sort of been able to tap into a real undercurrent of anger and frustration and grief and fear among women in the UK, lots of whom have been speaking up on this for a long time already, like Lauren, who's doing incredible work, but lots of women who perhaps have internalized the fact that they need to ask their friends to text them when they get home, when they leave to get back after dark, or that we carry our keys in our fists and we look over our shoulder while we're unlocking our front door. And I think, you know, realizing that we've internalized that and that that's wrong and shouldn't be our status quo, I think has been really motivating for lots of women around the country, and helps to sort of hopefully amplify the work that people like Claire and Lauren and others are doing. So what we're trying to do, we feel a big responsibility as a group of women who have made a big splash about one thing to carry on that work. So we are looking at sort of legislation, education and community action. So broadly, we're looking at how our laws are written, what they legislate for and how they're enforced, because our experience working with the police is that we were treated differently as a group of women, and that is wrong if we want to have an institution that we can trust to report harassment or violence to. We want to educate boys, men, all genders around empathy, around the impacts of toxic masculinity, around consent, and we want to be starting really early. There's no reason why we can't be working with sort of kids in reception in year one around permission-seeking behaviour and make sure that we are embedding that cultural shift from as early as we can. And that has to go all the way up through our school system, into campuses, into colleges, into workplaces, and it's something that I'm really excited to be able to sort of work with others on, who are already doing great work in this space. And I think the third piece is around community action. We've done lots of fundraising for organisations that are funded by a charity called Rosa, specifically around marginalised groups of women and girls who, through sort of intersectionality, you know, I'm hugely privileged, so looking at issues around race, around disability, around sexuality, all of the different reasons why women might be even more unsafe in our streets and have even more challenges that they face when trying to access justice. And I guess where we're coming from is, you know, people say, why don't women and girls feel safe on our streets? And the police said this to us a lot when we were organising the vigil, that it's so rare that women go missing, and it's so unusual that women are abducted, and murders by strangers really just don't happen. And I just think that that's, it's not true. It feels like we're sort of every week having to communicate about a different woman who's been attacked or killed. At the moment, there's a big search in Manchester, for example, for Minna Onamaki, who has been missing since the 23rd, a 14-year-old girl just out and about. It is a big problem, but it's also that when we have to define safe as purely not experiencing the most serious and violent crimes, I think we've gone wrong. Safe needs to mean more than just not being abducted, but it needs to be not being catcalled when you're in your school uniform. It needs to be not being grabbed or sexually harassed or made to feel unsafe. It needs to include not being followed home at night, not being curb crawled. And it's extraordinary that things like curb crawling aren't illegal unless you ask for sex. So we've got a situation where actually there are lots of behaviours that don't fall under our sort of legal system as is, and those that do, the reporting rates are low, because how can we trust a system that doesn't prosecute rape cases? Or, you know, we've got this week the statistics say that 1.6% of rapes recorded by the police result in a charge or summons. That means sort of over 50,000 women who report rapes have absolutely zero access or recourse to justice. So when we're asked, well, why didn't you tell somebody when you were followed home? You go, well, what are you going to do about it? So I think when we sort of refocus my final minute onto solutions, I think this partnership working is so important. It's really important that we've got such a wide range of expertise on this call, and presumably lots of experts listening in as well, drawing on all of that, to make sure that we're holistic. It's not just about funding more streetlights. You know, as much as I like to see the government put their money where their mouth is behind the issue of women's safety, a few quid for some more streetlights isn't going to do it. It needs to be about strengthening the law, making sure that we achieve prosecutions. It needs to be about education. It needs to be about identifying those hotspots. And this is where Commonplace comes in, so that we can enable informal reporting, so that we can make sure that our policing is targeted to the places where women feel most unsafe, rather than sort of the hotspots that they assume. It's about getting more women into the police force and changing the way that our police force operates. So I'm going to stop there, because I think there'll be time for Q&A, and we've got Keith and May and others who are going to be able to talk in a bit more detail, hopefully, about some of those changes in our public spaces. But a big thank you to everyone for joining today.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you very much for everything you did around the vigil. I was one of the women who needed the things that you were saying to actually have somewhere to channel my anger and frustration and pain. I think it's really important what you've said about how surprised some people are by this. That includes my husband, who it never occurred to him that walking down past Clapham Common back from my choir practice, I would always carry my keys in my hand. And his reaction was, "So I'll come and get you from choir practice." No, 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 no. That is not the answers that we're looking for. And amplifying the conversation across our families and across our communities is as important as amplifying the conversation with the authorities, the police, and the people who shape our places. So thank you for everything you're doing to make that happen, and also for extending it to the much wider problem, which we don't hear enough about, and the intersectionality involved in that. I'm going to come on now to May to tell us about some practical work that she's doing in Scotland, I believe. Over to you, May.
Yes, good morning, everybody. May East, British Brazilian urban ecologist, a UNITAR Fellow working with cities in both Global South and Global North in policy, theory, and practice. So over the years, I have contributed to the shift of cities, towns, villages towards carbon constrained lifestyles, and witness firsthand the historic urban planning gender gap. This is in slums, in neighborhoods, tribal villages, mining cities. And as a consequence, I engage into a PhD, and I'm on halfway through my PhD, which explores how cities would look like if informed by the experience and needs of women. And I guess this is the reason why I'm in this conversation today. So in my research, I'm mapping how women in Scottish cities experience, access, and shape inclusive, safe, and regenerative green and public spaces. By regenerative, the research means urban projects that promote progressive interventions, allowing the social and the ecological systems to co-evolve and thrive. It's not only the human aspect, but it's the human and the ecological systems. Would cities be more poetic, livable, safe, and green? So a core insight of regenerative development theory is the idea that we can shift from dominance and control to intimacy with the entity of place. This depends on knowing place on the level of experience and relationship. Therefore, I propose a new concept called presency, merging the meaning of presence or as a mindful way of paying attention to life, moment by moment, in the now, and agency as a critical awareness of the context and capacity to act. It's not only acting and transforming, but also is reflecting and being present. So I'm investigating how innovative ways of mapping both the presence and the agency of women in cities may unleash women's emancipatory placemaking skills, moving cities systems up to higher orders of integrated expression. So in other words, how cities would look like if sidewalks were built, public transport networked, alleyways illuminated, green spaces maintained, and low carbon neighborhood funds distributed, informed by the inner and the outer experience and needs of women and girls. So my research therefore triangulates parameters of safety, green spaces, including allotments and active travel and low carbon futures. And I hypothesize that mapping as an emancipatory tool in gender placemaking. So looking at safety, which is the focus of our discussion today, my findings so far indicated that the geography of fear, or geography of women's fears, is changing with the rise of technology, smartphones and apps, supporting women to swiftly gather, produce, and navigate city data, and providing what Jane Jacobs called once the eyes on the street. And this is happening everywhere, not only UK and Scottish cities. It's happening in Kampala, in Barcelona, in Umeå, in São Paulo, in Curitiba, everywhere. So Jane Jacobs suggested that our streets are safer when there is a crowd of people, because if someone is in trouble, the eyes on the street are ready to assist and protect from danger. So platforms such as the one that Commonplace has just launched called Community Heatmap provides this collective eye and mapping space where local authorities, civil society organizations, women and girls, and urban practitioners and researchers can engage in progressive conversations on how are we going to deconstruct urban environments where disruptive patterns of violence against women and girls could eventually manifest. So it's about deconstructing these urban environments. So conclude this brief reflection, the Persian poet Rumi would say there are 1,001 ways to knew and kiss the earth. And I believe there are 1,001 ways to make the streets safer for women and girls. In my systematic literature review, I found 3 different approaches which deal with women and safety in streets. So the first line of investigation, which I can define as urban determinism, is built upon the premise of the fundamental condition of vulnerability of women and argues how historically cities restrict, disadvantage, and oppress women, positioning us as women a segment of society that needs protection. This is very much reflected in the SDG 11 narrative at target level, SDG 11.2 and 11.7, where women are characterized as amongst the vulnerable members of society requiring protection alongside older persons and persons with disability and children. So that's one line of narrative that women are vulnerable. The second approach, adopting more of a social deterministic feminist lens, promotes the idea of urban environments liberating women by widening their socioeconomic horizons and opportunities and providing an escape from obsolete normative behavior expectations. This approach claims that these women who themselves are those who remain best suited to elucidate the position of women in society and consequently in urban environments. And there's a third line of argument, and the one that my research draws on most, which includes and transcends the previous 2 approaches, the women as a vulnerable member of society and women as the one best suited to elucidate our position in society. And this approach adopts much more, I would say, a pluralist or pragmatic perspective where women in cities are systemically implicated in the construction of each other, in a dialectical causation of co-evolving mutualism. So what I'm saying is that I'm adopting a perspective of systems thinking for systems change. As an applied research, I'm working in partnership with local authorities, community groups, and housing associations, and women, basically women, considered as experts of their neighborhoods and capturing their impressions through walking interviews, all registered in a GPS platform. So one of the expected outputs will take shape of a gender-sensitive urban planning guidance manual for local authorities. I still have 1.5 years to go, but I have adopted what is called the WAL trend in research, which is working out loud, WOL, which means I'm sharing my theoretical frameworks and findings as I go along. I don't wait my 3-4 years of research to them to share. So if you're interested in entering into a conversation, you can reach out or follow me through my website or social media. I'll drop my email as well in the chat. So conclude this brief reflection, I would say that it is in dialogues like this one, with most different perspectives coming together and feeding into each other's thinking and practice, that we have the best chance of making a safe world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, May. I'm really encouraged by how often I hear Jane Jacobs quoted at the moment. For those of us who are urbanists, that's terribly encouraging, because she certainly knew it all, and we're finding it all out again. I'm going to just use this moment as a shout out for the Festival of Place lunchtime sessions next week, which are all about speakers on gender equal cities and what they'd look like if women were designing them, which I think links rather directly to what May's just been talking about. Now, we're a bit behind, but Keith has very kindly foregone his slides in order to make sure that we do leave some time for questions. Over to you, Keith.
Thanks, everyone. I'm really conscious of time, so I'll do my best to make some quick points that we can follow up afterwards and share the slides later that you can have a look at. So my name's Keith Stango, I'm the head of community safety in Islington, and it's really apt that I'm following the range of speakers that have already really succinctly put some excellent points across, particularly Anna, who was talking about leading community action in response and gaining women's voice that we're really keen on in Islington to hear. So as opposed to just keeps looking at the same old traditional crime hotspots, harm hotspots that might come through from hospital data and all that, we're really keen on where's the women's voice coming through and telling us more about what we should be listening to. So exactly what Anna was saying, not just where you might be seriously harmed, but actually where you're just feeling unsafe and where those places are, and understanding a lot more. So similar to what Anna was describing, we've been working with our women's organisations led by Islington for Women, who have wanted to round up some community action. So getting women's groups across Islington to come out and do some community walkabouts in key areas that they really have got some affinity to, and actually like the area and really have a warmth towards the area, and explain why they like the area so much, but then also what is it that's making them feel scared in certain places or afraid, and that could be absolutely anything. So there's a series of walks that we've started, one a month for 6 months, all in different parts of the borough, all led by different women's groups, being really clear it's women's groups who are leading it, and we're the support act as the council and the police. So we send senior leaders from each organisation just to listen and hear what women have got to say about the places that they love, but also the places where, why is it now that there's a concern in the place. And it could be absolutely anything from places they're walking or not walking to men's behaviour, to groups that are hanging around, to absolutely anything. And we capture those, and my community safety officers will go with them and listen and come up with some creative ways of how we could change that space or develop new ideas about making that space safer. It could be some physical changes in the landscape, like you'd predict if there isn't CCTV lighting and those type of things, but it could also be some more interesting ideas around working with some of the businesses around becoming safe havens there. What's our capable guardians in the area? How do we deal with men who might be congregating in the area and communicating some of those messages about why their congregation and what their behaviour is in certain parts of the borough is making women feel unsafe. That's part one. And that's we've had one of those so far. We've got another 6 plans. Leading into that, we want the youth council to be fully involved, who's headed up by a young female who's excellent, and who wants to then turn that into how do we get the young person's voice coming through on that? Can they do a series of women's walks and then young person's walks to pick up that voice? But what about the wider voice, the people who won't get involved in that? So we've started a campaign. I'm more than happy to share some details of it outside of this, called X Marks the Spot, where we've got some simple idea premises being a postcard, if you like, for every single ward on the borough, where you've got a map and a little text box where you can write where is it on this borough, on this wall, that you feel particularly unsafe, simple cross or circle, and a couple of lines about where and when are you feeling unsafe, with a little bit of demographic collection and a scale of how safe you feel, and then a free post back to us, which we'll analyse. Where this comes in really nicely with Commonplace is it links into their mapping software, where that's fine if you feel unsafe in the ward you live, but what about when you don't in other parts of the borough? So you can go on to Commonplace, and actually show where you are feeling unsafe. That should give us, we're actually posting them to every single household, 100,000 across the borough. So everyone will get one, including then we'll have some for our police officers, our libraries, our community groups, who every time there's people talking about their feelings of safety, we can collect some of that information up anonymously if people want, but also if we can get some contact details so that we can look at this information, analyze it in lots and lots of different ways. We can see what different wards think, we can see what women think, we can see what black young boys think, we can look at the whole range of different analysis that we might feel important to us, and then start thinking about what it is about that place. Does it link up with some of our crime hotspots already, and therefore we've got some action in place? And actually what we're not doing very well of is communicating back on some of the actions that's going on. So when you start telling people about, actually there's a lot going on here, could you get involved in it? Can we get some community action out of it? Would you like to come in and help us devise some solutions? And we might get some good response on that, because what we do know is lots of the forums and meetings and ward panels and everything that go on are so underrepresented. And so how can we build that community representation up, even if people don't want to come to the meetings, how they can feed in that information? And we can really use that to start channeling the work that we're looking at. So we can look at collective solutions, and some of those will be for evidence in bids. So there's money coming down. You might have seen the Safer Streets money that comes down from Home Office. There's other funds that are available, and we can use some of that information and evidence into actually demonstrating the need for investment in certain areas that our colleagues were talking about earlier. So that's where we're really going with this. It'll be really interesting to see. Now, obviously, 100,000 leaflets might go out. We might not get a massive take up, who knows? But you don't just do it as a one-off. So we do it as a series of every, we're looking at every 6 months doing a relaunch of this, but we're analysing it every, say, 3 months and seeing what the picture change is like. Is there a change in behaviour? Is there a change in some of the actions that we're taking? Can we measure that on a scale that will be fed into this? So it's about just trying to get as many of the women's voices coming through, and we can fully understand from many different voices that we wouldn't hear before around where we think and where we know on the borough that some of the things that we'll reinforce some of the learning we already got about where we know these places are, but there'll be a number of different places that come up that we're not aware of, or not aware of what actually is driving some of these feelings of safety. So I'll leave that there, because I know we're really conscious of time, and I'm more than happy to follow up some of the other bits and pieces that's going on and how this links together outside of this.
Thank you very much, Keith. I think there might be quite a lot of linking up after this. I can see from the chat, people are very inspired by by the speakers. Jen, I'm going to invite you briefly to talk about this heat map, which people have already mentioned, and tell everybody about what we're doing there.
Yes, thank you, Pam, and thank you, everyone. I think it's been an outstanding panel and a lot of learnings for myself, and I imagine for everyone who's joined. So yes, we have developed a community safety heat map, and the idea behind it is to enable women and girls and also other groups to drop pins on a map and say where there might be issues with safety, and more importantly, to say where they think they can help or where there are ideas to improve that area. And so really to link together the community with the local authority and the different groups within the local authority who have sort of an obligation to improve safety, to connect them together better. And so Fred's about to put up a quick poll. If you're interested in learning more about this heat map, please say yes. And our team will get in touch and actually show you the template that we've developed with a number of people on the panel today, and also some additional support we're offering through the panelists to help you with this initiative. And on that note, I will turn it back to you, Pam, for the Q&A.
Great. Well, we have just over 10 minutes for questions, which is great. And I'm going to start with quite an easy one, I hope, Claire. Someone's asked for a factual piece of information, which I think we might all like. Apparently, the UN Women UK website refers to 150 solutions for change that were taken to the UK Parliament recently. Are these published, and can you tell us where we can find them?
It's a great question, thank you. Yeah, those were the 150 that I talked about and showed you in my presentation today. So their report is not out yet, purely because we are a very small team working with a lot of work at the moment, but they're actively working on getting that report back out to you as well. We also have some really interesting insights in that from the over 2,000 community surveys that I think unearthed some really new information and also helped us to pinpoint, you know, I loved what Keith was saying, and I have certainly some thoughts coming out of those surveys on the best ways to record accurate information about incidents. So yeah, I look forward to sharing that soon, but please do stay in touch with us to hear more, and thank you for the question.
Great, thanks. Lauren, there's a question for you which relates to the engagement of men as allies in this conversation. Did you find that male students reacted well to the conversation? How did you encourage them to participate? What sort of contribution did they make? And can you say anything about another question which has come up, which is the extent to which we need to amplify the fact that it's the pretty white blonde woman who gets all the publicity, and so many missing women and girls from the BAME community we simply don't hear about. Is that something the students have talked about at all?
Yeah, great. Two amazing questions. Regarding the first question about getting male participants into the workshop, I was targeting all societies, so the rugby team, football team, and so forth. And whether their president was male or female, it was more getting forward the aim that we want all students to feel safe. And most presidents elect themselves for a role of responsibility. And I'm sorry, that's my cat in the background. And the main aim for males was for their female counterparts to feel comfortable in their societies. And most societies want as many people involved because that's the whole university experience. So I had, I think, 5 male counterparts that got involved, and actually one of the males contacted me afterwards to say that one of their society members did feel unsafe on campus, and he was confronted with this event and didn't know exactly what to do. And then I referred him to a few of the helplines, and just for him to make those decisions and actions made him feel better about his society and what he was representing, as well as allowing other females to know that the person in the main role, which is the president, was having their back in a safe environment. So it just involves a positive environment, and we have seen a lot of great feedback. However, as it is about women in safe spaces, you will find that it can feel as if we're accusing men of certain actions, and men may not feel as if they want to be part of the conversation. And what I referred to before is allowing that we can all make a change. We can all make those differences. By not pinpointing it on the male gender, it allows that conversation to be more open and allow males to actually contribute to the conversation. So that's my main advice, to have an open conversation, because it's not always women that feel unsafe in environments, it's also men as well. So to involve them in that conversation is vital. And to amplify the conversation, just to touch on that question about the BAME community, there is a lot of media about the stereotypical blonde, blue-eyed woman, and a lot of people did have some backlash on the Sarah, unfortunately, event. What the conversation on campus was that we can show our support of all backgrounds to this conversation, but also using it as a way to highlight the other women that have been feeling unsafe and their backgrounds. So to amplify the conversation of the BAME community and what they are also feeling in this conversation is needed and is linked to the social media posts that are being put on the internet. So that's what I would say. I would say to support, because the whole point is supporting each other. And by doing that, then we can get the support for other different conversations, which are definitely needed.
Thanks. I think that's a really important, practical and quite simple suggestion. Thank you for that. And also I want to thank the men in the audience who are involved in the chat saying that they're thinking about things they haven't thought about before. We really welcome your contribution and your coming into this conversation with us. Keith, a question for you, I think, from Tony Hall, talking about the challenges in areas, maybe not so much in London, but even in London, of the conflicts at borough, county and national level for responsibilities for some of this, and how that can be improved, especially as we come out of lockdown with quite a lot of uncertainties about how we're going to move around, how we're going to be in places together.
I think that's a really challenging, but actually absolute valid question, and some of it goes right back to where we just spoke originally. So when these things happen, you get a government response that generally throws money at the problem, like it did after Sarah Everard, and we're going to put more money in, and that filters down to PCCs and crime commissioners to then look at how they spend. And the problem we have is that it then comes down to it's a 1-year cycle of funding. And how are you going to make lasting change in a 1-year cycle when we can't roll the money over? We've got to do something quite quick. So what we have to be much better at is just the collaborative working. So trying to find those, like it's been spoken about today, some excellent bits of practice that's going on across, and how we can make that collaborative across more than one borough. So what we're doing, you know, how do we influence what other boroughs are doing, and how we join up a bit around some of this space, so that it isn't just each borough doing something completely different across the country, or each place doing something. Where's that shared learning coming on from? So I was hope as part of this forum is one, but obviously there's lots and lots of work going on across the country, and we just need to be better at collectively bringing that together and sharing the good practice. So everywhere we're going, we're speaking about where's that good practice being recorded, how are we sharing it with each other, how do we get some sort of minimum standards in some of this work that was just expected. But I think the voice, the biggest problem is just getting the voice of what would make a difference, and then being able to share that. So if we can get this bit right around collecting some of the views of people who actually have got some ideas and want to talk to us, it'll be quite interesting. I think we're at a very good crossroads, because we've got a lot of volunteers and a lot of community spirit coming off the back of lockdown. What we're finding is there's a lot of organisations, a lot of agencies, a lot of businesses who are coming back, who want to make a difference, who have been volunteering or helping to make a difference in lots of different forums in the voluntary sector, and just volunteers generally, that we need to be tapping into a lot more for this space around safety. So it might have been a humanitarian response to start with, but actually there's a lot that they can help and contribute to in this space. And I think it's trying to tap into that somehow. I haven't got the answers, I'm afraid, but I think we're moving in the right direction, I think.
Well, that's exactly why we're having this webinar, to put a bit of boost under that movement in the right direction for those who we can reach. I think a question here that's for you, May. Are we doing enough to link the issues of women and safety with environment issues such as climate change and green recovery, making women part of those conversations too, where we're underrepresented in the professions that are actually planning our future? That's one, yeah. I know is a core of your work, isn't it, really?
Correct. We are not doing enough. So one thing that we've been discussing in UN circles, that like the same mindset that has created the problem cannot solve it. So while we start looking at safety by itself, or climate change by so resilience of city by itself, we may still not get the systemic change that we need. That's why in my research, I am triangulating climate change or low carbon futures with women's safety and also green spaces. So I think that by looking at the interdependencies, we may get some more findings than just looking at the problem in an isolated way. So I'm still working towards it, but I believe that we should look at from a systemic perspective and a historic perspective, because our cities have been built since Second World War from a male perspective, like the planning officials, architects, the largest firms of architecture in the world, they're all, you know, much more populated by the male perspective than the female perspective, but that's another conversation.
And Fred is telling me I really have to wind us up, which is a great shame, but we've had fantastic speakers and I hope you'll all agree it's been well worth hearing them. I just wanted to answer one question, which is in the chat, which is how different would our streets look and feel if they were designed by and for women? And I think that is exactly the conversation going on next week at the Festival of Place. So maybe I'll see lots of you there. Thank you all for joining. As I mentioned, we're going to share the recording and the sample map. We hope you'll find our mapping tool useful in the work that you're doing and the thoughts you're having. And meanwhile, my choir, which I mentioned before, has a particular habit of jazz hands to thank our very committed and excellent speakers. So please join me in thanking them, and thank you all. Have a good day.